This Can't Be Happening at Macdonald Hall by Gordon Korman. You keep ants? Once again, Elmer's alarm went off with an ear-splitting shrill at 6 a.m. He rose promptly and began to dress, vaguely aware that something was not quite right. He puzzled over the odd feeling but continued to get dressed. "My ants!" he cried suddenly. "My ants are gone!" Elmer stared at Bruno's bed. It was empty. It did not take him long to realize that Bruno's absence and the ants' disappearance were somehow related. He threw the door open and bolted into the hall. About 3 doors away, Bruno was hurrying along with a large glass aquarium that contained Elmer's ant colony. "What are you doing?" Elmer shrieked. "Haven't you ever seen Born Free?" Bruno replied. "These poor creatures are in captivity. They deserve to be free." "No!" The racket was beginning to penetrate into the other rooms. Scrambling noises, cries of, "Hey, pipe down!" and "What the heck is going on out there?" could be heard all along the corridor. "Freedom is their right," Bruno continued solemnly. Go, little ants. The wide world awaits you." On that note, he dumped the contents of the aquarium onto the floor. Elmer's face wrinkled up like that of a baby about to bawl. If Bruno hadn't been sure that he was doing something absolutely necessary, he would have felt terribly guilty. Suddenly, the door of room 205 burst open and hit the mess on the floor. Sand and ants flew all over the hall. Elmer let out a piercing scream. What did I do? What did I do?" asked Perry Albert. "I just came out to see what was going on." "I'm going to see Mr. Sturgeon," Elmer raged. Perry was dumbfounded. "Please don't," he pleaded. "I didn't mean to open the door." From room 203, a shoe came flying into the hall. "Shut up out there," yelled a voice. "It's only 6:30. "They're getting away," Elmer wailed. It was true. Ants were scurrying in every direction. "What's going on?" asked a sleepy voice from 211. "Stampede!" Bruno yelled. By this time, he was enjoying himself immensely. "All I did was open my door," Perry kept insisting. More doors opened. In seconds, every boy in dormitory 2 was milling around in the general confusion. The hubbub was broken by Elmer's half-crazed voice. "Everyone stop!" he commanded. Everyone stop!" he commanded. "Don't move! You'll step on my ants!" "You keep ants?" echoed a dozen voices. "He's an entomologist." Bruno intoned, "His world is the insect world." "Help me," Elmer pleaded. "Help me get them back into the aquarium." "Born free," sang Bruno, "as free as the wind blows." In a short time, a gang of pajama-clad boys were crawling around the halls after Elmer's ants, using water glasses, toothbrush containers, and even test tubes to collect them in. Elmer, here's 3. We've uncovered a whole bunch of them under the radiator. Here, Elmer, here's 9 or 10. Elmer, there's a crack in the floor and they're going in there by the hundreds." "Be careful, stupid, you just stepped on one." "Elmer, about 50 have run up the wall and they're going out the window." "Yick!" "Report 9 dead in room 213. Arthur has a chameleon and he's eating them." "Who's clumsy? You stepped on 3. When the dust settled, about 50 ants were present and accounted for. Another 30 were proven dead. The rest, some 520, were still at large. As the boys settled back to normal and began to dress for breakfast, Perry walked over to Elmer. "I only opened the door," he implored. "I don't even understand the bit about the ants." At 7:30 the same morning, Boots was writing to his mother. George was still asleep. "Dear Mom," Boots scribbled, "how are you? I'm fine." He hated writing letters. His parents expected to hear from him once a week. "Everything is okay. I have a new roommate. He is rich and a crackpot, but with him, I will never get sick. Your loving son, Melvin." Boots watched George intently for a few seconds to be sure he was sound asleep. Then, on tiptoe, he approached the only shelf in the room that was not filled with medicines. Carefully, he took down the book marked Mint Stamps, Canada, and opened it up. A set of Queen Victoria 1886 definitives caught his eye. He removed a few different types of stamps and left the book open on George's desk. After neatly arranging a few coins on the open page, he stuck the stamps on the envelope and mailed the letter on his way to breakfast. He had never felt so rotten in his whole life. Boots joined his friends in the dining room, hoping the company would help him forget what he had just done. But he didn't take part in their chatter. Instead, he sat wondering about Bruno's first attack on Elmer. Bruno can't possibly be putting Elmer through what George is going to suffer, he decided. Just then, the peace and quiet of the dining room was shattered by the half-demented voice of George Wexford Smith Smythe the third. "Where is he?" George charged into the dining room in his pajamas. Boots dropped his fork with a clatter. "Uh-huh! There you are!" George screamed. "You dirty, rotten cad! Where are my stamps?" "I borrowed some to mail a letter," Boots replied offhandedly, trying to keep cool. "You stuck them on a letter?" George cried. "You've ruined them." "What's all this fuss about?" Boots asked. "I left you 17 cents. 17 cents! George's face grew pale. "Those 3 stamps are worth $350. Boots pretended to be astonished. $350? He scoffed. "They added up to less than $1. He spoke with amazing nonchalance, growling something about seeing the headmaster. George Wexford Smythe III wheeled and tore out of the dining room. Bruno smiled when he received the summons from Mr. Sturgeon. His plan was obviously right on schedule. He was humming Born Free as he walked to the office. Mrs. Davis greeted him with her usual sympathetic smile and sent him right in. Mr. Sturgeon was waiting for him. So was Elmer Grimsdale. Elmer's face wore a smug, "Now you're going to get it" expression. You are familiar with the bench, Walton," said Mr. Sturgeon. "Sit down, please." Bruno sat down on the hard wooden bench. Nothing that Elmer, noting that Elmer was comfortably established in the padded visitor's chair. "Grimsdale tells me that you have destroyed his valuable ant colony. Is that true?" "Well, I guess so, sir," Bruno answered. "You see, I was trying to set them free. All my life I've hated circuses and zoos, anywhere animals are held in captivity." "Those are very fine feelings," said the headmaster, but they are your own. The ant colony, however, was not your own. It was Grimsdale's. I think you owe him an apology." "I'm sorry, Elmer," Bruno said readily. Elmer did not reply. "That's fine," said Mr. Sturgeon, "and now I think you owe him something else." Bruno waited silently. Mr. Sturgeon leaned back in his chair and tapped his fingers together. "Grimsdale, how many ants did you have in that colony?" 600, sir." 600, sir," Elmer answered, "and now I've got 50. "Walton," said Mr. Sturgeon, "how is your arithmetic? What is 50 from 600? Bruno's heart sank. He swallowed hard. 550, sir." "Very good. That's the exact number of ants that I expect you to collect, together with new sand for the aquarium by the end of the week." "Me, sir?" Bruno asked. "Alone? By myself, sir, with no one to help me out?" "You catch on quickly," Mr. Sturgeon replied. "That will be all. I suggest you begin immediately. 550 is a lot of ants." "Yes, sir," said Bruno. He rose to leave. Just as his hand touched the doorknob, the headmaster spoke again. "Oh, Walton, one more thing. I have been forced to call an exterminator to spray dormitory 2. The cost will be deducted from your spending money." "Yes, sir," Bruno repeated and escaped from the office. He was no longer singing. Then and only then did it dawn on him that neither Mr. Sturgeon nor Elmer had mentioned the riot that had taken place in the dormitory hall. Elmer, in dire distress over the loss of his aunts, had simply not noticed the ruckus. As he walked through the outer office, Bruno saw George Wexford Smythe III, white-faced and tight-lipped, waiting to see the headmaster. "I wonder what Boots did," he thought. With the note from Mrs. Davis in his hand, Boots crossed the campus on his way to Mr. Sturgeon's office. As he approached the flagpole in front of the faculty building, he suddenly caught sight of Bruno, on his hands and knees in the grass, surrounded by jars and boxes, spreading sugar on an anthill. Come out, wherever you are," Bruno was chanting. "Uncle Bruno will take you to a new home with your wicked Uncle Elmer, where you can dig tunnels until you drop dead." "Hey," Boots hissed, what are you doing?" "It's quite obvious what I'm doing," Bruno grumbled. I'm finding the 150 ants I owe Elmer. What are you doing?" "I'm on my way to see the fish, too," Boots said uneasily. George thinked. "What did you do?" Bruno asked. "Mailed a letter." Looking very unhappy, Boots walked on. "Sometimes I just don't understand him," Bruno muttered, daintily picking up an ant. Bruno walked through the big oak doors of the faculty building and proceeded down the corridor to the office. Mrs. Davis was still wearing her sympathetic smile. She sent him right in. "Bench," snapped Mr. Sturgeon, pointing to the seat across from the desk. Like Elmer before him, George was seated in the visitor's chair. "O'Neill," Mr. Sturgeon began, "I hear that you have ruined 3 valuable stamps that belonged to Wexford Smythe." But I paid for them, sir, Boots defended himself.
Yes, said Mr. Sturgeon. You paid for them. You paid a few coins, when in reality they were worth $350.
But, sir, Boots protested, they were just sitting there. I didn't want to wake George up, and the letter to my mother was late, so I just...
I know what you jest, Mr. Sturgeon interrupted. Now see here, O'Neill, you cannot possibly expect me to believe you thought those were ordinary stamps. One need not be a philatelist to know the difference between Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth II. I think you owe Wexford Smythe an apology.
Boots studied the carpet. I'm sorry, George, he mumbled.
And I think you also owe him $350.
Boots' head jerked up. But, sir, where am I going to get $350?
Washing dishes, replied Mr. Sturgeon. After school, from 7 till 9, the school will pay you $2 an hour.
But, sir, Boots exclaimed, that's 3 whole months.
Quite correct, said Mr. Sturgeon. That will be all, O'Neill. You are dismissed.
As he crossed the campus and passed Bruno, Boots muttered, well, you're ahead 55 to 350. Well, you're ahead 550 to 350. What are you talking about? Bruno grumbled. I got 3 months of dishwashing, Boots snarled, at $2 an hour. What did you do? I told you, Boots snapped. I mailed a letter. And that is the end of that chapter.